absolutely loved this event. It's been so much fun having so many data engineers in the room. But I've got to say, I was particularly looking forward to this moment because it gave me an opportunity to sit down, so thank you very much. Now, we're going to have just a very, very short panel, and I am joined by an incredible, incredible cast. So we've got Dean Nguyen, then we've got Ingrid Sola, and then we've got David Nuki and Wendy Wong. And in a moment, I'm going to get each of our panelists to introduce themselves. But I'm just going to say I've got the talking stick at the moment, so I'm going to introduce myself. Hello, for the friends I haven't met yet. My name's Simon Aubury. I'm a principal data engineer, and I get to work with some incredible engineers at ThoughtWorks, and I'm based in Sydney, Australia. And I've seen that slide up a few times with all of the data products, and I like to look at them, and I think I've managed to use half of them, but sometimes I have aspirations to use them all. So although I love to think of myself as a data engineer who was a data engineer before it was called data engineering, I have a particular passion for event streaming systems, and particularly Kafka. So if you want to take up your entire evening at the Orient Hotel later, ask me about my passion projects. Speaking of which, a little fun fact about myself, if you look at my GitHub project, you'll see that about almost all of my pet projects on my GitHub profile are in some way related to my cat. So that's a fun way of learning data engineering, is to look at household chores with your cat. Anyway, that's enough about me. I would love to hear about our panelists, so I'm going to pass it over initially to Dean. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. My name is Dean. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a metadata startup based in Sydney called Carter. We work with organizations across financial services, insurance, retail, transportation, to help them solve their data discovery, trust, governance, and FinOps problems. Before I started Carter, I was the chief product owner for data at Macquarie Group, and that was working across a global cross-functional team in data.
Cool, thanks. Ingrid, love to hear about yourself.
Thank you, Simon. I'm Ingrid Sola. I'm the head of data at Stake, an online trading platform. I have been in the data space for 15 years plus, 13 of those in Australia. I have moved laterally through data roles, but I have a soft spot for data engineering. And before data engineering, I did software engineering for a while.
Cool, super interesting. And David, love to hear about your background.
Hey guys, my name is David Nduku. I used to be the head of data engineering at the now infamously defunct Metigi. For those of you who have read the IT news over the course of the last few weeks. But I've since moved on from there, thankfully, doing something else. I've been in data engineering for a while. I've also come from a traditional software engineering background, and I accidentally got into data engineering back in 2016 when I worked in a team that built out Australia's first big data streaming pipeline on AWS for one of the biggest retailers in town. So ever since, I've been in data engineering, and I'm hopefully going to be sharing one or two tips, lessons learned along those sort of journey over the course of this panel discussion.
Cool, thanks, David. And I had the opportunity to read Wendy's bio before, and it looked fascinating. But Wendy, love to hear about your background.
Simon. So like Simon, I also love cats as well. I try to incorporate it in all my teaching. So I'm a business performance analyst at Service New South Wales, so we support Department of Customer Service. And I'm also a lead instructor for data analytics at General Assembly Sydney, and I'm also an AWS data community builder for Australia. So I love building community, and prior to that, I've worked at PwC for analytics and data science consulting, and I also organise Women in Big Data meetup, and also Women in Data Science meetup in Sydney.
Cool. What an incredible panel. We've got coverage from all different areas, and love to be able to tap into some of that knowledge. And I thought how we could actually run today's panel is, I've got a bunch of burning questions, but I'd also be interested in what's on your mind. So maybe if there's a question that you have for the panel, I'd love to throw this over to you in a moment to see what would you want to ask such an esteemed panel. But I'm going to claim first spot here while you're thinking about your question, and I'm going to throw a bit of essentially a broad question in, and it's something that Joe started with today. And it was basically a basic question of, we often hear the words data engineering, and we've spent all day hearing from some fantastic speakers around some of the attributes, some of the concerns, and some of the enabling technologies that support us in our data engineering journey. But to me, sometimes it's a bit unclear. What does data engineering mean? So I'm going to ask every panelist, and I'm going to start with David, to basically give your definition. How would you define data engineering?
Thanks, Simon. I actually thought I loved the last speaker's conversation. He did remind me a lot about my days doing a PhD in software engineering with all of those mathematical notations. I just love the angle he brought into data engineering, so which is good. And that's the way I like to look at data. So when I look at data, engineering, all right. So the way we look at it, accidental, like I did say, is sort of spun off from your traditional, software engineering, approach, brought in all the good things, from software engineering, and all of those is being gradually, making its way into data engineering. But in a very simplistic sense, data engineering is all about building systems, systems that enable you to collect data and also ensure that the data is presented in a way that is usable, for the end, consumer, to then make use of. Now, but again, collecting data is one thing, and then presenting that data in a sort of fashion that is usable is another thing. So you need to look at the full gamut, of making that happen. So there's a life cycle, there's an end-to-end process that is involved. Now, gone are the days where a data engineer, is the sort of guy who plugs in a tool in one source system and brings it into a destination. No, things are changing gradually. Now, as we get more and more variants of data sources, from your sensory devices, IoT, to streaming data sets, to collecting data, via APIs, or doing the old style, batch, data collection, I see data engineering being able to also evolve to accommodate all of those as we grow over time. Now, so then collecting that data is one thing, then storing that data is then, a different kettle, of fish altogether. So you need to look at how you store the data efficiently, thinking about the right partition strategy, how do I, store, maximize, space, compression, algorithms in place, what's the best way to secure the data, and also ensure that the data is good enough, for the down, end consumer, to then use that data and make meaningful value out of it. So your job as a data engineer actually doesn't end with collecting the data. If the data is not usable, you haven't done anything. You've actually written code to get data and then dump in one spot. But you got to make that data usable, and then it becomes meaningful for the next person down the chain to be able to consume that data. So that's the way I look at it. You got to be able to deliver value from collecting data all the way from the source and then presenting it to downstream, consumer using a range of toolings, and techniques. It's actually a craft, the way I look at data engineering. It's a very strong craft.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Anyone else want to build on David's answer? What's your canonical answer for what is a data engineer, or do you have a spicy take on what it isn't? Dean?
Look, I think from my perspective, one, I would say read Joe's book. It probably covers it way better than I could ever describe it. But I think the role of data engineering, especially now, is becoming much more jack of all trades. I think maybe a while ago it was quite specific. It was about moving data around. But I think now, given the value that companies are expecting to get from their data, suddenly you have to be able to not only understand the business processes and how data is being used, but also how does it deliver value all the way from source to consumption. And I think one of the things that we've always tried to focus on in my previous life in enterprise was about how do data engineers actually see the end-to-end. And that's something that, if you were responsible for an application or responsible for, like a mainframe, you only saw your small bit. But data engineers actually have to force themselves to expand their perspectives.
Cool. Ingrid or Wendy, would you like to tap onto that?
I think that I see data engineers as enablers, like enabling the power of data inside the business. And from my point of view, before data engineering, data was seen as a supportive functionality in most business. With data engineering, data become a first-class citizen and a functionality by itself, standalone within the business. So I think the chance of competitive priorities is less thanks to the data engineering.
Yeah. I think I might just mix it up a bit and put Wendy on the spot. So you work with government, and I guess I'm interested, do you see there's a growing demand for data engineering in and around government?
Yes, there's a huge demand in government. So we're just on our journey of digital transformation, and there's a long way to go. So, excuse me. So just supporting Department of Customer Service, we have so many transformation projects such as My Service app, looking after COVID, looking after the Lismore flood. How do we piece together and work with other agencies to centralize all our data sources? And how do we engage with our customers on apps, on the website as well, and through our contact center, multiple channels. So we've got a richness of data, but how do we integrate all of them and put them in a data lake? And obviously there's PII, and how do we source that from our parent company, Department of Customer Service, to support Service New South Wales so we can deliver services to our citizens. But there's that data governance piece. We can't just access that data, and that's where Snowflake comes into place. So how do we create virtual machines, add another data layer, pull that into Redshift, and also create value. So what everyone's talking about today, build the first use case, what can we create value, what's our first POC? So like safety culture, like the speaker from safety culture, we're on a journey of maturity. So we're just starting with reporting and then building our data capability. And so there's a huge need for great and very skillful data engineers. So if you're looking for a job, we're hiring. And we've got employee referral program, and we've also got a boot camp for data engineers as well. So we want to upskill our own people, but we need all of you. So it's really flexible lifestyle in government, and if you're looking for a job in government, speak with me.
So I think I've heard that theme a few times today, but just love finding out a bit more about government and some of those sort of dimensions of the data engineering business. Now, this has been sort of a nice, gentle warm-up for our panel, but I'm looking out at a sea of people who might have interesting and spicy questions. Who's got a question that might be, that they've always had on their mind, or do you want to try and stump the panel? I'm looking for anyone who can add a spicy question or something that you would love to quiz our panel on. Oh, Tiago.
I would like to know how you see the role of data engineer on the requirement gather for dashboards or analytics done for data analysts, and how can it be managed by data contracts, where it can be applied, and how do you see that?
Okay, so just to paraphrase your question, you're interested in the roles, the responsibility, and the involvement of data engineers in requirement gathering and where they might sit in defining data products. Is that correct? Cool. Who would like to? I'm glad I'm asking the questions rather than answering them. Who wants to jump in and try and answer?
I think that one of the main roles I see in data engineering is, again, because data engineering enables the power of data in the business. One of the roles with interacting with data analysts and other data practitioners is establishing that flow of data, not just left to right, which used to be the pattern up to a few years ago, but now we see more and more the flow of right to left, right? Like what the data, before it was data analysts, producing data and business insights that it will go to the stakeholders, but now data engineers are giving more power, and all that analysis, machine learning, deep learning can be actually delegated to data analysts and data scientists, and the data engineer can take a role of taking that data back into the product. And in my opinion, that means that responsibilities are better distributed across the pipelines, because sometimes you have application developers putting in place some algorithms or some analysis, some decision algorithms that might be better implemented by data practitioners. So I think the data engineer role of moving that data left to right and right to left will be the next big thing that is going to empower business.
Cool. Anyone else want to jump in? David?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. So the way I look at it is this. Now, most data engineers, they just want to be engineers, right? Most of them have come from your traditional software engineering background, and all they want to do is just to build pipelines, right? There will be very few engineers who will be interested in having requirements conversations. And it's not every time you go into an organization and you find an engineer who wants to sit down with business SMEs and have requirements conversations. A lot of them, or 50% of them, will rather stay away from requirement conversations and let the data architects have those sort of conversations and then bring the requirements in-house and then they roll it out, right? But if you're lucky to have a data engineer in your team who can have those sort of conversations, then that's a positive thing to have in your team. But having said that, I think it's quite critical and also important for a data engineer to understand how data has to be consumed, right? On the consumption end, but it's not. And then you start to appreciate the need to put in more rigor into, for example, metrics like data quality, ensure that the data is of the highest, sort of value before you can then push it out to an end consumer. But if you don't have that conversation of the visibility, then you might not understand certain pain points. Sometimes the business raises certain pain points. Hey, this dashboard is not working or something is broken. It will be so far-fetched from you because you haven't engaged in those sort of conversations with the business, right from requirement gathering or elicitation even to productionizing data set. So it's always a good thing to have a data engineer who's able to speak those sort of that sort of language. And it just helps the business to also derive maximum value because then end-to-end, the value of data will be delivered on the consumption end. So it's while it's a good thing to have, but it's not absolute because we won't find data engineers who will fit that sort of bill. Yeah. Not.
So, do we have any other questions? We have a wealth of experience on the stage covering scale-ups, startups, and enterprise. We've got a question at the back, and possibly no microphone.
Yes, so maybe another spicy question, right?
Spicy.
Yeah.
So far, we've been dealing with data at scale, and we've been empowering software and AI with a lot of data, right? That's the bread and butter of everything we've discussed here. But let's look forward to the next.
Let's look forward to the next evolution on data, and let's consider things like one-shot learning and where we're starting to teach systems to think at layers of abstraction, right? So as that requirement for data at scale, it's not going to be next year, but eventually as that requirement for data at scale shrinks and shrinks, what happens to data engineering as a profession? Where do you see that going? What kind of skills do you see as being not immune, but those skills that would adapt and overcome those challenges as we change paradigms from massive amounts of data-powered systems to abstracted learning sorts of systems?
Okay, so this is a super ambitious question. I love this question, by the way.
In short form, are we going to all lose our jobs?
So there might be a bit of crystal ball gazing here. There's obviously a lot of competing tensions when it comes to the challenges and the evolution of data engineering, and we kind of have to think about some of the implications of where the industry is going and some of the challenges. So I was just wondering if any of you on the panel wanted to riff on what do you think the future of data engineering looks like, understanding some of the constraints when it comes to data handling, data management, and anything from big data down to small data to edge data to contained data. I was wondering if anyone wanted to riff on an answer.
Yeah, I think one thing that we're starting to see is some of the traditional engineering challenges are becoming a lot easier. Technology or startup scale-ups are emerging to solve some of these things that I guess traditionally engineers would be focused on solving for most of their day-to-day job. As those challenges become less, I think as a data engineer, you kind of have two choices. One is to get closer to the business to solve business-type problems with data engineering capabilities, and the other one is to chase where those traditionally complex problems are emerging. And I think in some industries, they may not exist. Like it may not necessarily be in this industry that we actually have these kind of complex engineering challenges, but they might start appearing in other industries which traditionally haven't been there. So I think it's going to be industry by industry, And I think as someone in data engineering, you're going to have to sort of start pointing yourself towards whether you're going to focus on more the very hard problems to solve for, and they might emerge in certain places, or it's less about the traditionally hard problems and focusing more about just delivering value to the business.
Okay. Anyone else want to be brave enough? Wendy?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. And, David raised a good point. So in government, with some of the data engineers, they're not 100% focused on a project full time. So they're working on several projects and they're delivering different pockets of, data engineering projects. So because we don't have a dedicated data engineering on a piece of problem and they're not involved in consulting and the data discovery, like a manager will tell them, just go and build. So they want to understand what's the why, what's the purpose, what's the use case. So data engineers don't get involved in the data discovery, so they don't know why, what they're building, and how can they add value. So they're very important in part of the journey, but they don't see the full picture. So I guess it'd be great to actually involve them early on in the projects. But we're evolving as well, and we need, highly skilled data engineers as well in government. So it'd be great to build that pipeline, to have that thought leadership, and also that data strategy that can be communicated.
And that's a very good question. But, and thanks, guys, for the input as well. But the way I look at this is this. I think the challenge of data engineering is going to shift, as we begin to get more and more, proliferation of data. Data is going to become more available. It's going to become more ubiquitous. The challenge would then be moving away from having to build pipelines that are centralized into being able to decentralize your pipelines. So I think data engineers will need to start thinking ahead. Now, today we'll talk about the concept of a data mesh. Now, it's all about domains. Data is sitting in sort of pseudo-fragmented zones. Now, so the way we're going to evolve data engineering is such that we need to then look at how we can embed our engineering practices within the domains, but also be able to ensure that the domains are handshaking at a very great layer of abstraction. And that's a very hard engineering problem to solve. Now, and the evolution of data engineering is going to be so important that it becomes like the engine room for building our data products. Typical data products will be made up of multiple domain compartmentalized sort of components. Now, how do we engineer components at scale and ensure that we are mixing and matching data sets in a way that can create useful data products from all those sort of and so the concept of distributed data pipelines is going to become more and more prevalent in the course of time, and that's going to be the next evolution of data engineering challenge. That's the way I look at it. Right. We need to solve the data mesh problem. And we're not yet there in terms of the architectures and the way we think about data engineering right now. But I think in the next couple of years to come, all that is going to change radically.
Yeah. Awesome. So I reckon we're running up against time, but I reckon we've got time for just one more question. And it better be a good question because it's keeping us from going to the bar. So are there any questions from the audience? Question over here.
With the proliferation of tools and hype around all the different vendors out there, how do you hire data engineers? There's no accreditation. How do you find the right person for what you need?
Okay, I had a bit of trouble hearing you, so I'm just going to paraphrase just to see.
It's very quick.
Yeah.
How do you hire a data engineer?
How do you hire data engineers? Awesome. A non-trivial question to finish the day on. How do you hire data engineers? Who wants to jump in?
I think that's a very good question. I think that as data engineering have been around for a while, now we get to see more managers and more leadership that can understand the difference of the roles. Because I think that the challenge that we were facing a few years ago is that difference between what a data engineer does, what an application engineer and what other data practitioner does was a bit blurry. So I think that because the definition is clear now, You just have to be very clear of what the scope of that role is, and that's on us as leaders to define that. And then you have to ask the right questions. What you said before, I think that you said something about proliferation of tools. You have a different breadth of data engineers that are more hands-on, more infrastructure-oriented, which is similar to what you said before. The data engineer will need to decide if he wants to get closer to the stakeholders and data practitioners' business insights, or go closer to the data producers and the application producers. And in that case, I think that you have to ask the right questions to know where the data engineer sits, and be clear about where do you want the data engineer to sit. So you have to ask the right questions in order to make sure that you give the right role to the right person.
And I think that's a good response as well. But the way I look at it is this: as a hiring manager, you need to have a sort of set of skill, in terms of what you look out for in a typical data engineer, right? So and you need to break it down nicely, all right? So I want to hire a data engineer, but these are the primary qualities I'm looking out for. These are the secondary qualities, and these are the tertiary qualities. Now, like I said, data engineering itself is like an art. It's a craft. You need to understand the concept of building pipelines, collecting data from sources, irrespective of the kind of data sources they are. It might be streaming data, APIs, sensory data, and all whatnot. But there has to be an art, to collecting that. There has to be a science. So the data engineer, first of all, needs to understand how that should happen. Now, the tooling bit is not a primary concern as much for me, because if I get a data engineer who's quite smart, who understands the art and the science of collecting data and building pipelines, then learning tools will be secondary. They could be smart enough to pick up new tools. Today, there's you expect every data engineer is expected to keep up to date with new tools. And so as they come up, onto the marketplace, you need to learn them. But I'm not going to use that as my primary criteria for looking out for a candidate. Okay, so that might be secondary. And then other nice to haves. For example, someone asked a question, about whether or not, it should be mandatory for a data engineer to go have conversations with the business. That might be a requirement, for you, a tertiary requirement or not, perhaps. It depends on what you want, in your team. Perhaps you already have data architects or data analysts who can have those sort of business conversations, and then, you are quite clear in terms of what you want. So it's important for us to really, itemize, on a very clear scale. These are the qualities I'm looking out for. These are the primary qualities, these are the secondary qualities, and these are the things that do not necessarily matter. Once you are clear on those, I think it will make your recruitment effort very much seamless and streamlined. Yeah.
What a fantastic answer. And thank you for the questions from the audience. Now, I'm going to say that there's so much energy and passion here, but maybe we could take this enthusiasm and take it to another, more casual environment to continue the conversation. And with that, I'm going to say, let's draw a line under our panel, but I do just really genuinely want to thank Dean, Ingrid, David, and Wendy, and please show a level of appreciation for this fine panel.